On the heels of the federal budget just being announced, billions in federal spending are promised each year for reconciliation from clean water projects to new Arctic infrastructure. This is why an investigation by journalist Patti Sonntag in the Investigative Journalism Foundation, finding that much of the money meant for Indigenous businesses is actually ending up with firms based around Ottawa, is such an important and timely story right now. Patti joins us right now with Amanda Leader, a student journalist who worked on the project through the First Nations University of Canada. Patti and Amanda, welcome to the show. Patti, let me start with you, and I'm wondering if you could just sort of walk me through on a high level what your team was able to uncover in this reporting that you've done.
Well, First Nations leaders have been asking for years, and by years I mean since 1998, I think is the first year, who was profiting from contracts for Indigenous businesses, like which communities, where was the money going, was what they wanted to know. And Indigenous Services Canada never answered that question. They said, we're going to look into it. We used Treasury data, and then Indigenous Services Canada provided data, which was really new after all that time, and other figures. And we were able to show and find out, what we uncovered was that most of the contracts are going to the Ottawa area, like more than 60%, and specifically to about 24 firms. And almost all of the rest of the money is just dispersed. There's a lot going to Nunavut. And so, but aside from that, most of the Western provinces, and even within Ontario itself, most of the other businesses are simply left out, I guess is the best way to put it, getting 2 to 3% of the remainder of the funds.
Yeah, I want to unpack this and really get into this. This is a great article. I would encourage listeners to head on over and make sure that you're either checking out the Investigative Journalism Foundation or reading this article through APTN News. Are those the best places to go and get the information, Patti?
Yeah, for sure. And
okay.
let's not forget First Nations University of Canada that has been really helping out on this.
Well, that's a great segue. Amanda Leader is also joining us right now, and I'm curious about your involvement both in the project and what your thoughts are on the story.
Yeah, it was a great opportunity to be able to be a part of this project and be a part of the research and interviewing of a lot of the contracts, some of the contracts that were happening, being given out in Saskatchewan. And yeah, it was really alarming, to see that data and see the lack of contracts that were being awarded to places that you see high amounts of Indigenous populations. So it was really, really concerning, and it just creates questions like, why are a lot of these contracts only being awarded to that certain circle of favor that it seems to be created there?
Yeah, you both asked a similar kind of question. So maybe I'll circle back to you, Patti. And so as you started to look at this information and uncover, what can you tell us? What does the data show about who's winning these contracts?
Well, there is this group of businesses, usually in IT and consulting. I mean, there's some office supplies, always in the Ottawa area, and so then the job was to look into why, as you're asking. And I mean, there's a lot of people have theories about why it's happening, but fundamentally, I mean, Indigenous businesses and non-Indigenous businesses kind of have this in common. There is this huge barrier for small and medium-sized enterprises to compete for federal contracts. And this means everybody. In Canada, 96% of the businesses are small and medium enterprises. So it's everyone. Doesn't matter if you're on reserve or not. And the issue is that only 25% or so of the contracts are actually competitive, according to the procurement ombudsman. So we're looking at a small percentage, and then who is going to get that 25%? Well, the figures show not very many small and medium sized enterprises. And then on top of that, The data indicates that it is, Indigenous businesses, when they encounter that barrier, are not getting past it. So a few experts said things like, well, it's more difficult for Indigenous businesses to lobby. And sure, yeah, there's that. But we don't know all of the reasons why. We just know that it's happening.
Yeah, Amanda, I'm looking at a chart here from source materials from Indigenous Services Canada. The analysis is by the Investigative Journalism Foundation, and I'm seeing that in Ottawa-Gatineau, 2.6% represents 2.6% of the Indigenous population nationwide, and 63.4% of the contracts are going there. What do you think of this data? What did you think when you were part of the team in this, and you started to see this pattern, Amanda?
It's extremely shocking, especially during the time of this class, there was a information session put on for the Indigenous business procurement in the city of Regina. And it was shocking to me how many small Indigenous business owners that I had spoke to that didn't know about these info sessions, So it's shocking that they're not being advertised more. There isn't as many info sessions as maybe is needed to have more input from the smaller businesses, Indigenous businesses. But yeah, it's extremely shocking, especially when you see the provinces where there are high amounts of Indigenous population compared to Ottawa. It was like, what is happening here? So yeah, it was very shocking because there's definitely businesses in those other provinces that could benefit from this.
Yeah, Patty, I'll ask you the exact same question I asked Amanda. Like this data, to me, this really tells quite the story. This is something else, and seeing it visually represented. Again, I'd really encourage listeners to make sure that you're heading on over to the Investigative Journalism Foundation and looking at the article to sort of see it's astounding. I don't know. What did you think when you were learning about all of this?
Well, the information needed to get out there right away. And so once we had it, it was time to put the pedal to the metal and get that in front of the public. It got some interesting reactions. Like Daryl Wright, who is an entrepreneur in Saskatchewan, he runs Seed to Leaf, which is environmental consulting business. I mean, they do all kinds of environmental jobs. And he said, well, we put in bids and then we don't get chosen. The bids instead go to multinationals for the most part, often American multinationals. And he had a great line. He said, it's hard to imagine that a Canadian can't cut wood.
No, it's truly eye-opening. The other one I like, the other line I like in this is from Ian Lee from the strategy and public policy at Carleton University, who said sunshine is the most powerful disinfectant. Amanda, as a journalist, how important is it to get this information in front of people? And there are going to be people that are maybe going to want to talk about this around their kitchen table. What should those conversations look like?
Yeah, I think it's paramount, and I think that was also, I love that quote because there's so much lack of transparency today, especially when it has to do with Indigenous issues. And that has to be at the forefront in order to create change, in order to make sure that it's a fair process, and yeah, I hope that, there are conversations that start around supper tables, business tables, things like that. Because the lack of information that's being shared, it's astounding to me how many people do not know that these contracts are even available to Indigenous companies.
Patty, you look like you had a thought.
Well, yeah, and also, it's never been reported before, right? Like the information was not available to anyone who was Indigenous, not for 30 years. So this is the beginning of the conversation. It's definitely not the end.
Yeah, let me keep building off that, Patty. And that's my question: is who's ultimately responsible for making sure that this is done in a fair and equitable way?
Well, legally, Ian said, there are few checks and balances. The federal government can spend money as it wants. I mean, that's legally been determined. But he said, politically and in terms of optics, that is not the kind of optics that a government is usually looking for. When we looked at, I did a comparison to contracts awarded to non-Indigenous businesses, and what I saw from the data available, and it is limited, is that for non-Indigenous businesses, the contracts are spread pretty evenly across the country, and Ottawa isn't even especially an important center. Toronto is more important. So what this tells us is that it's just the beginning, and it's something that Indigenous leaders have been asking for decades, and Indigenous Services Canada just didn't provide it.
Yeah, this is really something. Do you have any thoughts on the overall oversight, Amanda? And how does this affect you? Like, you're in a different region. I've heard from people in not Southern Ontario and not that sort of Ottawa-Windsor corridor that, like, there's a whole other country out there that maybe deserves to be in some of these conversations. I'm wondering if you have any comments on any of that, Amanda.
Oh, for sure. Like I said, I've had conversations with friends of mine who have businesses in Saskatchewan, and it's sad to me that they don't even know about these things, which, like in the article, there needs to be, like, I'm glad that it's going to be looked at, and there needs to be different checks and balances for how these are being awarded. And it seems like, like Indigenous people are an easy target for exploitation, if especially compared to the non-Indigenous contracts being spread out evenly. It's very concerning, and that's one of the main things. It was just super concerning to me.
Well, and those are the sort of questions that I jump to, and this is spoken to a little bit. I mean, there are some of our communities, some of our First Nations communities outside of Ottawa are only a couple hundred people in size. Some of them are much larger. But to me, this doesn't seem to. And I don't know. You spoke to about this a little bit, Patti, when you were talking about non-Indigenous procurement. Like, there are ways to make sure that this is done in a fair and equitable way. And I know I've sort of asked you this question before, but I guess this sort of leads into: is there any awareness of this that's happened, or did you just kind of arrive on this data and go, hey, is anybody else looking at this?
Well, we published an investigation last year, again, with students from First Nations University of Canada, which sort of started 3 parliamentary committees, and was eventually connected with a cabinet minister resigning from his post. The work of Indigenous journalists is powerful. So we were, with that investigation, we looked at this program, and we found that there were these widespread allegations that non-Indigenous companies were accessing this program through various means. And when we were looking at that, I noticed that, a lot of these contracts seemed to be going to Ottawa, but the data was too fuzzy to be able to, like, really look at it. But when I asked Indigenous Services Canada, they said, well, the contracts also went to 300 other companies. And so that made my ears perk up, because it doesn't matter, it wasn't a response that spoke to regional differences. So I was looking for a different response there. So I talked with my supervisors at First Nations University of Canada, and we took a deeper look.
Yeah, last year, with everything that happened around Randy Boissonneau and a lot of the things that were brought to federal attention, I want to feel like maybe there were going to be some changes. I understand we have a new government. I understand, like, the budget was just released. This is the first real budget now we've seen now in a couple of years from the federal government. And we're in this time and period of transition, and I'm wondering. I'll ask both of you this question, but I'll start with you, Patti. Like how much of a priority is this to the federal government based on the work that you've been doing?
Minister Gulmasti is looking at ceding control of the job of determining which businesses are Indigenous to an Indigenous organization. But we don't have any more detail than that, like who is in that competition, if there is one, and who's going to come out of that. We also know that the federal government has declared, a program for helping small and medium-sized enterprises to join federal procurement. But this combination of issues, I don't think was on the radar, and I didn't see any reflection of that in the budget.
Amanda, what's your high level read on what kind of a priority this is, and maybe what a path could look like based on both what you've seen, but also people that you've talked to, the data, and what a path forward could look like?
Yeah, it's with the article that had come out, it definitely shows that Indigenous people, it doesn't seem like we're a huge priority, right now, which it's shocking, it's disheartening, especially with young children, like we want to create change for the next 7 generations to come always. And it seems like it's a constant fight, so but I do agree, like we do need a different way, and an Indigenous led way, which could be more transparent, which could be more fair with how these contracts are spread out throughout the country. We need change for sure, but yeah, how that gets rolled out is definitely going to be on the on my attention for sure.
I mean, let me stay with you though for a second, Amanda. And I mean, sometimes we hear this with the lack of clean drinking water on our communities, and sometimes there's an implication that like we don't have the talent or the will or the people in our communities. And I sort of reject those kinds of narratives as someone again that's out and connected into our Indigenous communities. I don't know, when the federal government sort of says, well, like we haven't been able to put this together, or we don't have an Indigenous group to lead it. I mean, I don't know, how does that sit with you, knowing that you're surrounded by, I mean, you went to school at a First Nations university. You're part of communities that I mean, we have lawyers, we have doctors, we have engineers, we have bureaucrats, we have administrators, we have everything. So I mean, when you're looking to the future, it feels like the pieces are there, but the government could maybe do a better job just asking us what those solutions could look like. I wonder what you think that future could look like.
Yeah, I think, it's definitely community led. Like, I think a lot of the times there's one spokesperson who is out and making these decisions that affect a lot of people, a lot of different communities, So I think that having more community engagement, how can we make these changes and not just relying on certain people who might not have the community's best interest at heart, so there is room for change. We do need that change, but yeah, it's tough because, like you said, we have, like, the First Nations University of Canada pumps out excellence every year, every graduation. So why are we not using these bright minds that we have today across the country, of Indigenous people? Why are we not using them to create this change? It's definitely something that can be done, but it's the work, right? It's the boots on the ground that, yeah, it would take a lot of work.
Patti, we're down to our last couple of minutes here. Is there anything I haven't asked you about that you want to make sure that our listeners, that sits with our listeners for this?
Well, one of the solutions that Veldon Coburn here in Montreal, he's an associate professor at McGill, he proposed was regional safeguards within the program to make sure that the money gets spread out more evenly, because it is an equity program, and equity programs are generally, understood to be across the country. So that is one of the solutions on the table that your readers might want to discuss.
Amanda, is there anything you want to make sure that our listeners are aware of in terms of this story and your thoughts?
Like you had mentioned, get on the websites and read through this article, and check out the budget, and see what's happening, in regards to the Indigenous people here in Canada, because it's a concerning time, and it's not only concerning for Indigenous people, but it should be for the country as well.
such a poignant point that this, I mean, if this can happen to Indigenous people and in Indigenous communities, this is a reflection of a lot of broader patterns on a government level. Amanda, leader, thank you so much for being a part of this interview. Patti Sonntag, I really appreciate both of you and your time. Thank you very much. Digitwa.
Thank you.
Finamia.